Welcome to Conversations with Dr. Stephen Greer. This is Dr. Greer, and I'm joined today in this interview with Linda Willitts, who, of course, has worked with us for many, many years. And we're going to be talking about something very interesting today to people who like sort of some of the far-out stuff that has to do with the extraterrestrial and UFO phenomenon. And it's really the history of what Dr. J. Allen Hynek called high-strangeness, which is a term that he used back in the 60s and 70s to describe some of the things that have to do with the transdimensional, some would say paranormal, although for us it's become rather normal, aspects of this. And this is the reason we're doing this is because so often people forget that there's a very, very long history stretching now about 50 years, maybe 60 years, into a period where the types of observations that deal with how ET spacecraft and beings appear and disappear were called high-strangeness, but also the experiences people have in proximity to either the beings or to the spacecraft. And however, what wasn't known until fairly recently when we started putting out the scientific and explanations of it is how these things happen and why they were happening. And so I want to connect some dots, taking a sort of a journey through history over the last 60 years since the 50s and sort of share with people how this has been viewed. And one of the things that we find that many times people who first look into this come to it from a very sort of nuts and bolts, kick the tires on the UFO sort of perspective. And that's certainly understandable because people start from where they are. And however, we have to understand that if it's purely a kick the tires on the UFO type thing, you're probably talking about one of the anti-gravity vehicles made by Lockheed Martin at their Skunk Works or by the Phantom Works at Boeing, which used to be the McDonnell Douglas. We'll get into this in a minute. And also maybe from Northrop's Grumman Secret Operations or some of the other facilities that are up in the high desert of California near Palmdale and Lancaster, up near the Edwards facility or the areas out in so-called Area 51, which is really Pahut Mesa, and some of the other classified areas in Utah. And that's more of the kick in the tires because you're dealing with things that are man-made, anti-grav things that are manufactured according to conventional manufacturing, but also while they are anti-gravity, they're not nearly as exotic as an extraterrestrial interstellar vehicle. And the distinctions are significant because when you're dealing with faster than the speed of light, you're talking about technologies that literally phase shift from linear space-time transdimensionally into other dimensions and back again. And so the kinds of experiences that people have when they're in close proximity to an actual ET spacecraft or an ET being are quite distinct from that of a man-made so-called alien reproduction vehicle, or ARV as it's been termed. Or in the old days they were called flux liners because they picked up the energy from the magnetic field flux of space-time and would be anti-gravity and weightless. And to anyone who look at them, they would look, oh my God, I just saw a UFO, which is sort of true. It was unidentified to them, but it certainly was an extraterrestrial. And so when you start talking about the actual ET stuff, you're talking about really, really interesting sciences and technologies, which is what CSETI, the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, deals with, and the Disclosure Project deals in disclosing. So you can go to CSETI.org and disclosureproject.org and see more about this. And we put a lot of this out in various books and papers and videos that describe it. But I want to sort of summarize this. And I want to go back to one of our witnesses who had worked in the aerospace industry for many years, Dr. Robert Woods, who is a Cornell and scientist who became a aerospace engineer for McDonnell Douglas and worked closely with Mr. McDonnell himself. Now, a lot of people don't realize that McDonnell Douglas aircraft that got bought out some years ago by Boeing, had their Phantom Works and also had Mr. McDonnell had a very high interest in so-called metaphysical issues as well as UFOs and all the high strangeness attached to it. And I was fascinated. If you go to disclosureproject.org, you can see there's some books and videos that we have that have a number of these top-secret military and aerospace engineer witnesses in them. And one of our interviews that I did was with Dr. Woods. And Dr. Woods told me a number of really interesting stories that illustrate what I want to talk about today. And one of them was having been asked by Mr. McDonald of McDonnell Douglas to look into the UFO issue and to collect evidence and information on it, particularly on the propulsion and the anti-gravity part of it. And this was back in the 60s. And Mr. McDonald had a long-term interest in this. And I also found out from Lawrence Rockefeller when I was out at Lawrence Rockefeller's ranch back out in the early 90s that Lawrence Rockefeller was friends with Mr. McDonald, and that they both had a very high interest in the metaphysical aspects of the ET presence and the UFOs. So having sort of been involved with this now for 20 years, I want to sort of give people the benefit of the history of this. It's often covered up, even within the UFO research community, and that is that all the way back to the 50s and 60s, it was known that there were people who were having contact experiences with ETs where the communication was through machinery, if you want to look at it that way, or electronics, but directly interfacing with thought. I'll never forget Dr. Woods telling me this story of having been sent to investigate a case, I'm pretty sure it was in the Baja California, where an ET craft landed and some people walked upon it, and there was an ET standing outside the craft that had a little sort of oblong or rectangular box sort of being held or attached to the midsection of the abdomen. And the people were communicating or had communications from the ET that were being directly transmitted from the ET through this communication system so that they heard it as clear as if you were speaking with your mouth in their heads, in their minds. And this has been called a neurophone, but a really advanced one that uses transdimensional electronics. And they began to investigate this. In fact, Dr. Woods and Mr. McDonald were very interested in these sort of cases. So we know that in the 50s and 60s, there were serious people in the air, the head of McDonnell Douglas Aerospace, for heaven's sakes, looking into this, what Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who ran Project Blue Book for the Air Force, called High-Strangeness. And it's because the secret and the real revelation, scientifically, if you will, about this whole subject has to do with the transdimensional and interdimensional nature of it and the way that ET spacecraft move through space, but also how their occupants communicate with each other and with humans, which gets into this very, very out there sort of world to people who aren't accustomed to it, but to someone who, on the World Puja Network, since you are all very adept and familiar with the ancient Vedas and the various cities of the Vedas, would seem not that unusual. Anyone who's read Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda would not be surprised by the ability to have these sort of communications and teleportations and materialization and dematerialization, except in this case, instead of it being something being done purely with mind and consciousness, there are technological systems that facilitate it and augment it and make it very reproducible and routine, the way you and I speak on cell phones or turn on light switches. So, that one case that Dr. Woods told me about, and it said it opened up a whole sort of panorama of research into the nature of how the ET civilizations come and go, and that their communication systems are interfacing with consciousness and intelligence through this non-local field of omnipresent mind, which is the sort of the nexus, the heart of all that exists, is this awareness, this cosmic mind, from which all matter and all space and all time and all electromagnetism and what have you and all dimensions are phasing and fluxing out of and being sustained by. It's a conscious universal hologram. The whole cosmos is awake and living. And the ET technologies are simply using more of that, if you will, spectrum of reality, as I call it, than 20th or early 21st century human civilization is. But we know about it because of the ancient Vedas and the tradition of the Puja, which brings to mind this knowledge of cosmic awareness, and with it, the foundation for understanding transdimensional reality with interstellar civilizations and how they actually operate. Now, back in 1991, I wrote a paper called The Comprehensive Assessment of the UFO ETI Subject, and this is in our first book, Extraterrestrial Contact, The Evidence and Implications, which you can get at disclosureproject.org. That book came out about 11 years ago now. And what's very interesting, or 10 and a half years ago, and what's interesting is when I first wrote that paper, sort of a white paper that did a comprehensive look at this whole subject, it included a whole section on consciousness-assisted technologies and technology-assisted consciousness. In other words, consciousness-assisted technologies is where the ET beings, or human, interface with their spacecraft or device, and those technological capabilities are assisted in interface with mind. The other way around works, where you have technologies that project or assist consciousness. So in terms of, I'll give you an example. Back in the 50s, there was a man who invented a system that got taken over by the intelligence community and the CIA that enabled the people to be hooked up to a set of electronics which augmented their ability to remote view or see distant places or see into the future. And it was electronic. So that's a technology-assisted consciousness system. So it works both ways, where the consciousness of the being or human can interface with the machine and augment its performance or project its performance or interface with it, but also where technology can assist consciousness. And that this is key to understanding extraterrestrial contact and extraterrestrial how they manifest around us. Because if you don't understand this, most of this is just going to be too bizarre for you to comprehend. Now, luckily, we have a whole history of people, anyone who's studied the deep knowledge of the Vedas and the deep knowledge that's in all the ancient traditions, whether Egyptian or Gnostic or Vedic or what have you, about the ability for consciousness and mind to affect healing at a remote distance, to allow for levitation, to allow for dematerialization, bilocation. There are many accounts of yogis who would manifest bodies in more than one place, et cetera, and so on. And so if you understand those deep sciences that are in the ancient Vedas, you're going to and Vedanta, you're going to understand the ETs really well. But if you don't have a foundation in consciousness and higher states of consciousness, you're going to be completely flummoxed if you're just running around trying to kick the tires of a UFO, because 99% of their technology has to do with the state of consciousness and their paradigm, their operational paradigm, which deals with these sort of issues. And I can tell you that this was well known in the intelligence community and the aerospace community way back in the 50s and 60s. Now, I find it humorous because often I will go to a conference where I'll be talking about this in 2010, and there will be people who are UFO experts where this is revelatory to them. And I'm always shocked by it because I'm going, how can this be revelatory when the literature going back to the 50s and 60s on this subject is replete with examples and expositions of this? It's just that it gets pushed to the side because people really don't want to have their comfort zone pushed a little bit. They want to stay in the reductionist, material, linear, stick it in your mouth, eat it and smell it sort of world of materialism. And the problem with that, and there's nothing wrong with the five senses and the physical world, it's just that that's not all there is to the universe. And if it's all that you're focused on, you're going to miss more than 90% of how the ETs actually are in our environment, how they're interacting with humans, and how they appear and disappear and materialize and dematerialize. So I think it's really interesting. And, Linda, you found some of the interesting names of aircraft because of the metaphysical interest that James McDonald, Mr. McDonald had, of McDonnell Douglas. And some of them were really interesting. You want to share some of those?
Yeah, they're really cool. You had me Google it. I found, of course, Phantom. The Phantom jet's really famous because it's pretty recent. Another was called the Voodoo. Banshee, the Demon. A cool name I thought was Moonbat, and Goblin, and Spectre, spelled with, TRE at the end, like that's another word for ghost, kind of an old-fashioned word, and Sky Ray. And McDonald also built the Mercury and Gemini space capsules for NASA, so got into some star systems there.
And also Mothership was one of them.
Oh yeah, one of the planes was nicknamed the Mothership.
Right. And so this interest is not well known in a lot of circles that the founder of McDonnell Douglas Aerospace had, but not only had but had asked some of his senior aerospace engineers to research very thoroughly, and did so. And in fact, one of the interesting accounts that we have from Dr. Woods was that during the late 60s, as you know, many of you may know that there was the Air Force had this Project Blue Book, which was really a front for their PR sort of front for the UFO issue. They were trying to, make it look like they were doing a scientific investigation, and then they were just putting out statements saying none of it was true, and it was swamp gas. And this is the famous account when Dr. J. Allen Hynek was the chief scientist and the astronomer for Project Blue Book for the Air Force, and Dr. J. Allen Hynek made the comment that the spacecraft that were seen hovering in Michigan were, quote, swamp gas, when he knew they weren't. And that caused a huge PR uproar, including Congressman Gerald Ford at the time, getting quite irritated that the things that people were seeing that were very credible people were being dismissed as a natural phenomenon when they obviously were not. And later, Dr. J. Allen Hynek left Project Blue Book and started the Center for UFO Studies, and actually made a 180-degree turn, acknowledging that these were real and they're most likely interplanetary. But he's the one who coined the term high-strangeness. And those of you who saw the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind by Steven Spielberg, Dr. J. Allen Hynek actually makes a cameo appearance in that after the huge mothership lands and people are boarding it, and Richard Dreyfuss is taken on board and what have you. What I find very interesting about what during that period is that Dr. Woods was looking into being on the so-called Condon Committee, and Dr. Condon was a scientist at the University of Colorado that had gotten a contract to look into the UFO subject by the Air Force. Now, what he really was, and I have a CIA document that states this, is that he was on the payroll of the Central Intelligence Agency, and his role was really to do a takedown, where basically he would set up a scientific committee. They would look at all the reports and all the photographs and then conclude that there was nothing further to investigate, so that the Air Force could close Project Blue Book and from then on just deny any of this was real. And Dr. Condon was the front person, and I have a CIA document that names him as being, and it says in there, his involvement with the CIA cannot be revealed because otherwise his committee's report would have no credibility. So now I got that document after I met with CIA Director James Woolsey. But what's interesting is that during that period, Dr. Woods from McDonnell Douglas was going to work on that committee, but he was going to Dr. Condon saying, look, these things are real, they're interplanetary, and he could see that Dr. Condon was simply, this is all in the interview, and it's at disclosureproject.org, and Dr. Woods, who's a very senior scientist at McDonnell Douglas Aerospace, said point blank to Dr. Condon that, you're just throwing out data and evidence and you already have a conclusion you've reached. And so Dr. Condon went to McDonnell Douglas Aerospace and personally met with Mr. McDonald, the head of McDonnell Douglas Aerospace, and asked that Mr. McDonald fire Dr. Woods from his position. And this is in the testimony we have from Dr. Woods, whose credibility is unassailable. Now, later, of course, Mr. McDonald called Dr. Woods into his office to discuss this, and Dr. Woods was not fired. But it became very clear to McDonald and to Dr. Woods that the fix was in, that even though they didn't have the CIA document I have now, they knew that someone had ordered Dr. Condon to pretend to be an objective scientist, but what he was really doing is that he had taken orders from the intelligence community to put together a group of scientists and to basically debunk the UFO and ET subject and close the door on Project Blue Book and just say once and for all, there's nothing here to investigate. And all this is in the disclosureproject.org materials. It's amazing what we have put together and what we have collected. And that's a story many people don't know. And when I first, learned this from Dr. Woods, I think that, he didn't know that I had this document from the CIA that named Dr. Condon as one of their assets. And I said, so I didn't tell him this until after he told me his personal experience with the Condon Committee that covered up the whole UFO stuff, but he told me how upset Dr. Condon was at him being there sort of saying, no, these things are real, they've landed, there's proof of it, there's enormous amounts of evidence, and we're being visited by interstellar civilizations. And so, the only way that Dr. Condon could sort of make Dr. Woods go away was to go to the head of McDonnell Douglas himself, Mr. McDonald, and try to get him fired. It turned out that what happened is that they just removed Dr. Woods from the committee, but he got to keep his job at McDonnell Douglas. So this is the kind of vicious, nasty stuff that the intelligence community does to cover this up. But what's interesting is that to the average person, or even to the average scientist, these sorts of committees and reports that are put together would look like they're being, conducted by objective, honest, trustworthy, respected scientists, when in reality they're on the payroll of the intelligence community, creating absolute treason and lying to the public, and in many cases trying to get anyone fired or have their careers destroyed if they get in their way. Now, an earlier version of Dr. Condon was Dr. Menzel, who was at Harvard, and he was an astrophysicist or an astronomer. I have to look it up. And he was a guy who also, I have CIA documents that name him as having been on their payroll. And he was the person back in the 50s and 60s going around saying, none of this is true, it's people seeing Venus rising, it's swamp gas, it's whatever. And everyone thought, oh my God, here is this esteemed and respected scientist from Harvard University. He must know what he's talking about. And so he would appear in media interviews, and he was the chief debunker of that era. So at every stage, there's someone who's on the payroll who does this sort of thing. Currently, we have this James Oberg who works with NASA, but who really works for the intelligence community, who also shows up on various, you'll see him on Larry King Live, you'll see him on various things, and I have debated him at the Purdue University School of Aerospace Engineering graduate school, and who would just get up and say, oh, none of this is true, and it's all It's the exact same line that Dr. Condon used, that Dr. Menzel used, and that Carl Sagan used. Carl Sagan was also on the payroll of the intelligence community, and he was asked to go around and say, oh, this stuff isn't real, but by the way, we can start the SETI project, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, with Dr. Drake, and let's listen for signals from outer space. But in reality, two of Dr. Carl Sagan's good friends are on our team and are witnesses who have told me that, in fact, he knew we were already being visited, that the ETs had landed on terra firma, but he had gotten on the payroll of the intelligence community and was out there basically carrying their water. And so, this is the pattern that goes on and on and on. And we can prove this, by the way. These are not things that I'm just claiming. These can be proven. And so basically what people have to understand is that for 50 or 60 years, it's been not only known that we're being visited, but that we're dealing with technologies that cross over into consciousness and into transdimensional realms, and that this was being studied and discussed quite directly 50 or 60 years ago, and it's really time for us to at least catch up to the 1950s. And so what CSETI is doing, the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and CSETI.org, you can see what we're doing, is that we're basically training people in the sciences and knowledge and in the science of consciousness, and understanding the nature of transdimensional contact that the ETs utilize in how they contact human beings, and how they appear in the space around us. And then we take people and we're training them to become ambassadors using this very much more expanded paradigm of reality. And Linda, you might want to review some of the things that are coming up here pretty soon that we're going to be doing.
Oh, wow. Well, it's all really exciting. We've got the Outer Banks training coming up this next week. Starts Sunday, this coming Sunday, the Outer Banks of North Carolina. And then after that, there's Crestone, Colorado in June. Don't remember the dates of that. I don't have those on top of my head. I think something like the 17th of June. Then in July, this is really exciting. We've never done an event in Europe, and we've got a workshop in France the 10th through 12th of July, followed by a UK, England training. And we haven't been to England in 10 years, so this is the first time in 10 years that we're coming back to England and do a training. It's July 16th through 23rd. And then that is followed by Mount Shasta, which is August 8th through 14th. And then September. After that, we've got an Asheville area, Asheville, North Carolina. Actually, it'll be in Clyde, which is a little west of Asheville, but that means it's even closer to the Cashiers Mountains, where there's been all kinds of UFO sightings. And that's going to be the 11th and 12th of September, and preceded the 10th of September by a lecture that Dr. Greer is giving in that area. And then in November, we've got Joshua Tree, and in prior to that, in October, Rio Rico, which is south of Tucson, Arizona, and that's our big conference. We did one last year, and it was very successful at this beautiful resort south of Tucson in the dark kind of desert, lush though kind of green desert area, and that's going to be the 2nd through the 4th of October.
Well, now what's wonderful about that event, too, is that we're going to have Richard C. Hoagland, who had been Walter Cronkite's science advisor at CBS, and also Colin Andrews, who coined the term crop circles, who will be there with us, as well as myself and Dr. Ted Loader, who will be doing an encyclopedic review of the new energy and anti-gravity and energy systems and what the OrionProject.org is doing. And so it's going to be, 3 nights under the stars making contact with a couple of hundred people, which is very powerful because of the way that happens. And what's really exciting about what's going on with these other, the most of these are week-long training events, and by the way, they're all listed at CSETI.org, is that our purpose is to train as many people to become ambassadors from Earth to these extraterrestrial civilizations and train them in the science of consciousness, meditation, higher states of consciousness, remote viewing, and also imaging. We're doing all kinds of new things with digital photography and other techniques where we're getting photographs of actual ET beings as well as spacecraft that are very, very close to the group. And this is all a breakthrough that's been happening in the last year or two. And one of the things that we train people in is how to form a group so that no matter where you're living, if you're living in France or if you're living in California or if you're living in Malaysia, you can get a group of 3 or 4 people and train them and go out after you've been trained to do this and go out and make contact. And we're getting reports from people who've been on these expeditions and these trainings that we're doing who've gone back, who've had amazing contact events that have happened after they've learned the technique of transdimensional communication and consciousness and remote viewing. And the reason that it works, it's sort of the Rosetta Stone of ET contact, is that we're stepping out of linear space-time sort of with our feet in concrete and expanding into a transdimensional understanding where we use an applied version of the Vedas. In other words, we're using the concepts that everyone at the World Puja Network understand in consciousness of meditation and remote viewing, and applying that to the understanding of faster than the speed of light communication and contact. And it's very, very effective. And in fact, when I first wrote this paper in 1991, it was 19 years ago this spring, and it made its way, unbeknownst to me at the time, through the CIA and the aerospace community. It was Dr. Woods who called me and he was working with McDonnell Douglas, and he said, "How do you know this? This is the most accurate, comprehensive assessment of this subject we've ever read." I said, "Well, who are you?" And he told me. He said, "Well, I work for McDonnell Douglas, and I've been looking into this since the 50s and 60s. And I said, "Well, it's based on the experience we've had. And it's based on the knowledge of the nature of faster than the speed of light travel and communication, which crosses into transdimensional reality, into consciousness, and in thought." And he was just flabbergasted. And it was interesting because that was an early confirmation 19 years ago from a senior scientist in the aerospace community that we were very much on the right track. Not that I had any doubt of it, because if you read Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge, sort of my autobiography that describes how I made contact back when I was 18 years old and what happened, you sort of get the sense that, once I had a near-death experience and then started practicing meditation, it became very easy to contact these ET spacecraft and beings, because they interface with consciousness and what I call coherent thought, very clear thought radiating from a higher state of consciousness. They can contact through those means as easily as we talk on cell phones or telephones or satellite TVs or whatever, which are all at the speed of light. Of course, they're electromagnetic signals. This is just another dimension, except I realized that they had their own technologies that interface with that level of consciousness. So what we do at these expeditions is that we train people in all these sciences and the knowledge they need to have to go out and make contact and just bypass the national security state. And this is why, it's really kind of, aggravated the intelligence community, is that I'll never forget the head of Army intelligence coming to me back in 1992 after we made contact in Florida on a beach outside Gulf Breeze, and we had 4 ET craft show up, and it was filmed by 6 different cameras. It was on the front page of the Pensacola paper the next day and what have you. And he said, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" And this is the head of Army intelligence with some guys who worked with him in Army intelligence and also the National Security Agency. And I said, "Well, we're doing exactly what I said we're going to do. We're going to make contact, and we're going to open a diplomatic communication with these civilizations, and we're going to use an expanded paradigm that involves consciousness and higher states of consciousness and remote viewing." And he basically said, "Well, you have no right to do this." I said, "Well, sure we do. We're free citizens of the earth, and we're awake, and we can do this, and there's no force on earth that's going to stop us." And I looked him right in the eye and said that. He was not amused. But the point is that, we have to take the power back. We, the people, have to take the power back from this cabal of petro-Nazis and control freaks that have stopped the truth about all this from getting out. And the best way to do it is to not only educate people, but to go out and make contact. And that's why we're stepping up this program. And what's exciting about what we're going to be doing in France is that there's a very ancient family in France that predates the French Revolution, but who had helped organize the French Revolution, and who are a very important family in France. And they have a fabulous chateau on 2,000 acres in Brittany. And they are giving us permission to use this 2,000-acre estate in Brittany for this 3-day training that we're doing for Europe. And it's going to be an amazing place. And interestingly, I have a whole portfolio that the family has provided to me of the history of this place, but also in recent times, the ET contact that's happened there including where there has been a craft that came down, a sort of a half-moon-shaped craft that descended right over the chateau, which they, with a little Instamatic camera of one of the brothers that we're working with, went out and took a picture of it. And then one morning, one of the gardeners or groundskeepers was coming in to work, and there's a pond or a lake in front of this chateau, which was built in the 1400s, part of it. And actually there's an old chapel on the property. It goes back to the 11 or 1200s, very, very ancient. And what's interesting about this chateau also is that the science fiction writer Jules Verne used to come there and have dinners and dinner parties at this place. And so it has quite an Akashic record there, which I think is going to be very interesting to enliven in this contact event. But this gardener, when he was coming in, saw this sort of a golden yellow craft that was transdimensionally shifted in and materialized right over the lake in front of it. And this was in broad daylight, early in the morning. So there's been some very interesting contact over the years on this 2,000-acre estate that we're going to have the private and exclusive use of, which will give us a very secure venue for doing this contact in France, which will be wonderful. So I hope those of you who are listening that are around the world who can get to France this summer can go there. And, of course, in England, we're going to have Colin Andrews with us some, and we're going to be going to Stonehenge, and we're going to be going to the ancient Avebury and Silbury Hill, where the ET spacecraft recently, I mean, you may want to review, Linda, what happened last year there near Silbury Hill.
Yes, it was in a crop circle area right near Silbury Hill. It seemed a police officer was driving by and saw some people out in the field that were unusually tall and dressed in white and with white hoods. And so he got out of his car and tried to check them out. And they moved abnormally fast for humans as they made their escape, basically. They were very unusually tall, and they were very unusually fast-moving, and he totally felt that they were not human beings from Earth. And so that was all over the news there for quite some time. I believe it was last July.
Well, and he got close enough to them that when they he chased them.
Yeah, right.
And they sort of dematerialized in this vortex of strange energy.
And their footprints in the wheat disappeared. I mean, they just quit at one point where they dematerialized.
Right. There were actually footprints of these ETs, and where they dematerialized and went back out into transdimensional space-time, the footprints just end. And this was in real time, and it was just. But also, right by Silbury Hill, there was a ET craft that blipped in and out that fully materialized a couple of times, and we're going to be right near there. The other thing that's very exciting about this expedition to England for this week that we're doing is that we're going to also have the use of this 1,800-acre estate in Wiltshire, which is in the county where Stonehenge is located, in Silbury Hill, and all these ancient mystical sites. And it's part of the Royal Trust lands, actually. And where this huge estate is right in the epicenter of where the most authentic and interesting crop circles have manifested over the years. And it's also where in 1992 we had a 100-foot diameter disc, ET disc, that fully materialized in the field that we were in, and came so close to us and was so fully materialized in this dimension that you could hear the electrical wires crackling on the pole, the wires that take electricity to the nearby farms, and our hair was standing on end. And the compass I was holding was spinning counterclockwise, the same as the spacecraft was spinning. So the craft was spinning counterclockwise about 10 feet above the ground, and my compass was slowly spinning with the magnetic field rotating. So these craft, when they're fully materialized, cause a magnetic field rotation. Now, this gets into some more high-strangeness, because what I want to talk about next is that when you have a craft either materialized or even if you don't see it, but it's in the area and our electronic detectors and magnetometers are going berserk like they have been for the last 2 years when we're having contact, there's an alteration in space and time so that people have the experience of time standing still or speeding up. We can be out for, this happened to us recently at Joshua Tree, where we would be out for 2 or 3 hours and it seemed like 15 minutes.
Right.
Same thing at Boca Grande. It's it's very, very, very profound. It's like, oh my God, it's like 1 a.m. Where did the time go? Or it can be the other way around, where time sort of spreads out. And the other thing is we're space, where we will be in an area and suddenly we'll be enveloped in an energy field where the space is darkened or lighter. And the rest of the remote, looking further away, just vanishes. And yet, we're sort of just in a field of energy. And so space will alter as well as time. And this has been reported as sort of the high-strangeness of ET contact. And another phenomenon that's really quite amazing is that when we had contact with this ET that we've determined is from the Andromeda Galaxy, about 2.5 million light years from now. And if you go to CSETI.org, you'll see this photograph of this ET being that Raven took a picture of and that flashed in, and she had her digital camera open for 3 or 4 seconds and captured it. And I have a whole write-up that I've put out there about how this happened a few months ago at Joshua Tree National Park. And we've had more of that happen at our last expedition at Boca Grande Island, which we're still trying to, I haven't even had a chance to look at all the pictures yet, I've been so busy, but of ET beings that are right in the circle with us, that are amazing photographs. Well, when this was going on, after we saw that this had happened, we had asked this ET being to return a couple nights later, and we were sort of doing a question-answer with this being. And we had all these electromagnetic detectors, including a magnetometer that picks up the magnetic field fluxing that was pinging right off the scale. And we're out in the middle of an 800,000-acre national park where there's nothing out there. And suddenly, when we felt that the craft and the beings were very close and there were all these abnormal spheres of light and flashes of light all around us and all our electronic devices going berserk, suddenly we realized that the temperature, we're out in the cold desert, it's like in the 30s, like 36 degrees, and windy, and we're up on this high plain up at 4,000 or 5,000 feet up in Joshua Tree National Park. And, it's really freezing, and it's November. And suddenly we're taking our coats off. It's so warm, and we had someone there with a digital thermometer, and the temperature went from 36 degrees to 69 degrees in a matter of minutes.
And it was really localized.
Yes, very localized, exactly where this being and this craft was, where it was altering the environment, where the air was, I call it a thickening of the air and the energy, and there was this radiant energy where it was actually became warm. Even though, with the naked eye, there was really nothing to see. But the electronics were all indicating, and so were the cameras capturing images. So there's an amazing amount of sort of high-strangeness things. And one of the things we've done in this new book that just came out, Contact, Countdown to Transformation, we have a DVD with it that shows some of these images that you can get. It comes free with the book if you order at disclosureproject.org, but nowhere else, because that's just how it's being done right now. But at disclosureproject.org you can get this book, and it has about 17 years of these experiences and a whole list of descriptions of the kind of high-strangeness things that have happened that deal with how these ET craft materialize, dematerialize, contact people, the effects they have in the environment, the effect they have on your sense of time and space. It's all really fascinating, and it's a whole new world, really, for people who get introduced to this. So we just love it, and that's why we're doing all of these special expeditions this year to train people. We're at this final countdown to open contact, and we think it's important that as many people as possible learn not only that we're not alone, but learn how to make contact, and to do so in the framework of universal peace without fear, to step into a whole new chapter in human history where we view ourselves as one of many civilizations in the universe living peacefully amongst our brother and sister planets, and that we leave behind this sort of ruinous period of endless war and destruction that we're in right now, that we're going to have to go through a massive quantum leap, a huge transformation in the next a couple of years to really get this planet put back on the path it should have been on 100 years ago if it hadn't been hijacked by the war profiteering warmongers and the petro-Nazis and the people hell-bent on destroying the earth for their own nasty greed and control dramas. And so I think this is why it's very important that we take this matter into our own hands. And one way you do that is to say, okay, they're there. The ETs are here. There's no evidence. Look at no doubt about the evidence. The evidence is overwhelming. So there's no doubt about it. What are we going to do about it? We're going to wait for the Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, to initiate an open diplomatic contact protocol? Well, that'd be nice, but until they do, we better do it. And, yes, we're providing information to senior people who are in the Obama administration. Yes, we're providing information to other senior government officials around the world. There's a G7 country that we're trying to move along in terms of doing an open diplomatic contact protocol. But the reality is that in the field of consciousness, of what Rupert Sheldrake called morphogenic fields, where things happen because people begin to do it, and that the more people do something, anything, the more it supports that pattern. So we can either be engaged in, debate and rancor and conflict and war, or we can be engaged in universal peace and contact and bringing out the real solutions in the energy sector, like the OrionProject.org is working on. So, you have to make this choice consciously. But once you make the choice, the doors are just opening. And what we're finding with our contact efforts over the last 2 years is that there's been this amazing ramping up of contact in every dimension: physical, ET beings, transdimensional, photographic, electronic, craft materializing right over us, you name it.
We've had them speaking to us more than ever.
Yes. Your people, the whole group will hear a number of ET voices right standing outside the circle, and actually have a recording of one at Orange County in November. So what's interesting is that this is happening with such a rapid increase. So what it says to me is that the time has really run out for the secrecy, and the time has run out for the old paradigm. And, we need to make ourselves ready for the big change, the big transformation that's coming.
It's all getting so much more and more exciting. And back to the temperature changes. I mean, those happen routinely. Most of our trainings are held in areas that get a little chilly at night. Mount Shasta, Creststone, Joshua Tree in particular. And it's very routine that we're comfortable, if not maybe a little bit chilly, sitting in our circle, but quite often we're very comfortable. And when we wrap it up for the night and walk back to our cars, at the same elevation, 50 yards away, it's dramatically colder every time.
Yeah, 30 degrees. I mean, not a subtle difference, like 2 or 3, but like 30 degrees difference. In fact, I remember in 2008 we left our site one evening, and it was up near 60 in the upper 50s, and we had this transdimensional craft all around us, and the electronics were all going off. We got in our vehicles and went just down the same road at the same elevation, a very short distance, and it had dropped to being in the 30s, around 32 degrees. It was a 25 to 30 degree difference. And this is not something that you can really explain, because it has happened everywhere. It has happened within England. In fact, one time we were out in this field, and it got so warm that it was very, very cold and damp in England. And people were there peeling off all their jackets and things because it was actually became balmy.
That's right.
And people go, "What is that about?" I said, "Well, it's an ET spacecraft can be seen, not seen, but present." And this gets into a discussion of when an extraterrestrial vehicle is phasing out of sync with linear space-time, but is present within our space-time enough to have an effect. It's bumping up, if you want to look at it this way, against the fabric of our linear space-time, and it's very, very close. you begin to have all this phenomenon, electromagnetic, light, spheres, orbs, but also temperature changes in the perception of space, of time, compasses that start moving, magnetometers that start going off the dial just when you're in a remote area where there's nothing that would make that happen. So this is the sort of thing that is really important, because that can often be something that leads up to suddenly a craft fully materializing in the field or overhead, or an ET being suddenly just materializing. And in the case recently of actually being photographed, which we have had happened at Joshua Tree National Park and then at Boca Grande Island this past February out in the Gulf of Mexico. So Lord knows what will happen next week at the Outer Banks, the barrier islands in North Carolina. And then we'll be in Colorado, as she mentioned, in June, and then all these exciting things in England and France in July. So I think that understanding the true nature of ET reality is important, because what they're really asking us to do is to stretch our wings a little bit and spread the envelope of our understanding, so that we're not locked only into the paradigm that we find ourselves in, sort of a materialistic reductionist paradigm that, in fact, that it's been known for 50 or 60 years that these extraterrestrial spacecraft are dealing with things that alter space, time, that materialize, dematerialize, that have technologies that interface for communication directly with consciousness and thought, and that, moreover, pick up our directed, coherent thought if we engage in expanded consciousness in the meditative state and remote view them and then connect to their people and connect to their electronics. This is what we train people to do, and this is why they show up. It's not as if they're just, randomly happening. These are very specific events that are happening because we have learned by studying this subject and through our own experiences how to do it. And now we're trying to share it with as many people as we can, because it's such a beautiful experience. And some people, when they first hear this, they go, "Ooh, aren't you scared?" I said, "Oh, never." It's wonderful and exciting and beautiful. I mean, there have been a few scary things that have happened by people coming up upon us. Or, we were in Mexico once and had a bunch of police come up with guns and tried to kill us and kidnap us and stuff. But humans are scary, but the ETs certainly aren't.
It's nothing but delightful every single time. It's just incredible.
Yeah, this is the irony of it, with all the spooky stuff and false information that's out there about the aliens. We've been doing this for 20 years, have never had anything frightening or harmful happen, even though we've had all this contact. But anything that has been sort of distressing has all come from the hands of our fellow humans. Uh-huh. So, ironically, the thing that most people worry about is the thing you don't need to worry about, and that's the ETs. The ETs are certainly not hostile, and they're certainly in a state of very evolved level of understanding of consciousness and of reality, because, let's face it, if you're traveling faster than the speed of light through intergalactic or interstellar space, you're simply not going to be able to be at that level of technological capability and be primitive and savage the way humans have behaved with each other in the last 100 years, where we've killed 200 million of our own people in warfare. You can't, because the technologies are so advanced that if you had that level of consciousness, you would obliterate yourself instantly. So it's the ultimate mutual assured destruction in that sense. And so, the fact is that these civilizations that are coming here are not only not hostile, but they're profoundly peaceful. Although there are aspects of them that have sort of a guardian function for the universe. And what I mean by that is that, if we step outside our own, just step outside our own human cage for a minute and go out into space and look at Earth and what we're doing to Earth and to each other, all the murders and all the crime and all the warfare and what I call planeticide, the deliberate killing of a planet by a bunch of people keeping secret all these sciences and technologies. And we're going into space, and we have secret weapons using these sort of electromagnetic scalar systems, and we have weapons of mass destruction, thousands of them aimed at each other, and we have these wars raging on the planet, endless wars, year after year after year. The ETs could be excused for being a little bit concerned about the fact that as a people, we're technologically becoming rather advanced, but we have not socially and spiritually advanced as far as our science and technology. And this is a dangerous period. And no wonder they would have a concern. You know, one of the top secret witnesses we have, Colonel Diedrichson, had been head of the Atomic Energy Commission, which is now the DOE, but back in the 50s and 60s. And he was in charge of all the nuclear facilities around the United States. And he said every single one of our nuclear weapons plants and nuclear manufacturing plants and storage areas and bases had been visited by these ET craft because they were very concerned about what we might do to this beautiful planet and to each other, but also that we're going out in space with these things, and that this is something that would make sense. So there is also a guardian function. But the fact that they're concerned about our hostility and may have done certain things in the past to protect the universe from us does not mean they are hostile. There's a very big difference. So I think we need to look in the mirror and realize that we need to fix our own problem before we get into a paranoid snit over the fact that, you know, all the rumors about the ETs, because in reality there's simply no evidence at all that they're hostile towards us. They have concerns, but they're not hostile. And so what we have to do is step out of that whole false duality of us versus them, and the whole mindset of cowboys and Indians in space, you know, engaging in sort of a galactic war and all this sort of stuff, which is the fantasies of the end of the world freaks, and really say, look, let's leave all that duality behind and step into a state of awareness where we see that we're all one conscious being in the cosmos, and it's time for us, at least some of us, to step forward as the wise people on Earth to be contacting these civilizations, welcome them here, and ask how we can work together, and to do this in a spirit of universal peace. And if you do this, my friends, you will be very surprised at how they will show up in your life and in your backyard and in your room and in your lucid dreams and everywhere else. So it's a very, very exciting concept. So this is what we want to teach everyone and inspire people to do. So. And that's why we're doing these events this year. We're really doing more than we've ever done, and I think this is going to be an amazing year for contact.
It's absolutely going to be amazing, and we're collecting more and more hard data especially in the way of still photos and camcorder shots with night vision, and now we're beginning to record more and more sounds as well. Right.
And you know, the people who come to these events, often they'll say that it's changed their life forever.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so it's wonderful. So I hope that you can make it, and I hope this sort of trip through the last 50 years of high-strangeness and transdimensional experiences helps people understand that really the reporting of these sorts of experiences goes back at least 50 or 60 years, and some would say thousands of years, to be honest. But in the modern era, certainly 50 or 60 years, and that really what we're doing is taking that knowledge and that understanding of a transdimensional universe, of a conscious, holographic, quantum universe, and utilizing that knowledge to make contact and to teach people to make contact for the purpose of universal peace and the creating of a new world where the Earth is living peacefully out in space with all of the other interplanetary civilizations that are waiting, I believe, to welcome us with open arms as soon as we learn to live together peacefully together on this planet. Well, that's what I wanted to share today, and thank you, Linda, for bringing that information. And I'd like to thank the people at the World Puja Network for allowing us to share this information to their listeners, and I hope to see some of you soon at one of these expeditions out into the stars soon. It'll be a wonderful experience for anyone who comes. And until then, be in peace, and God bless all of you. This is Dr. Stephen Greer and Linda Willitts, and we will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.